Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of K9s Talking Sense. I'm your host, Cameron Ford. This is episode 107, and I'm titling it The Search for Information in Tracking, Trailing, and in Search and Rescue. And my guest is Shay Cook, a very experienced search and rescue handler and trainer. So before I get into that episode, I just wanted to share a couple of things. We're going to be on the road quite a bit coming up, so if we're a little slow in replying to you, just understand that we are traveling and it's going to be international, so some things are going to be delayed due to time and so forth. But we'll get back to any questions and any emails as quick as we can. In addition to that, our gold members now have a private Facebook group. So we are posting videos in there, sharing exclusive content to the gold member group, where gold members can also share their videos and ask questions, and we do our best to answer those and give information. But it's a collective, meaning that those that are members can also answer the questions or share their experience and information. So I hope more people would join that group. There's lots of information shared, and we look forward to that growing. In addition, the K9s Talking Sense podcast group is also now at a little over 7,000 members, and I make posts there. Many of you see those. My goal is to keep sharing exclusive content for the podcast there, as well as some general information. Also, I've had numerous questions regarding the police canine detection dog trainers class that I'm doing with LAPD, October 28th to November 8th. If you're interested in that, you can sign up via our website. Now, the caveat being is if you are civilian, I do need a letter that you work with a law enforcement agency from the law enforcement agency that you work with. If you provide that, you can sign up for the class. This class is kind of being more geared towards law enforcement, so therefore the audience or the attendees need to have law enforcement background, work in law enforcement, or train law enforcement. But if you're interested in that, that's also on the FordK9.com website. Outside of that, I think that covers everything. Thank you guys all for being viewers and listeners to the podcast. Please like, subscribe, drop comments down below. All of that helps the algorithms that promote the show and help it get out to even more viewers and listeners. Again, thank you all so much, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of K9 Talking Sense, episode number 107. And on today's episode, I have my friend Shay Cook. Shay, welcome to K9's Talking Sense.
Thank you very much, Cameron.
So this episode, I wanted to share with everybody another tracking episode. People always reach out, tracking, trailing, area search kind of stuff. We need more of that. So today's episode is going to be geared towards that side of the detection dog world. So Shay, for those who don't know you from the Mark Rober video, some of those might remember that, but we'll get into that coming up. What is your background? And like you said, your background's really extensive, from academia to being from, like you said, cadaver handler to area search. So just give us a brief rundown of how you got into this and where you're at today.
Try to be brief. So this is going to be brief. So I initially started working with dogs in 1986, and it was just working at a kennel for, you might know the name, Gary and Peggy Park. They did Schutzen many, many years ago in the 90s.
I know Gary Hanrahan.
Different
one. Okay.
And from there, I started doing then guide dogs for the blind work and helping with that. And one of my friends, I was working at a vet clinic and going to school to become a veterinary technician. And she said I should look into doing search and rescue. So before that, I had tried my little toes in search and rescue and Schutzen, and I was not really meant out for Schutzen in the 90s. It was a little too compulsionary, too much hardness for me. So I only did that for about 3 years, and that was with the German Shepherd Dog Club down in San Jose.
Okay.
And then with I got the guide dog, and he came back as a career change. And my friend, her name was Bonnie Finswaite. She's like, why don't you look into search and rescue? So I came out, and I kind of got addicted to it. So I did it with my first dog, Glacier, and he was an area dog. So I did, and then that was in 1995 I started. I think I got certified in 1996. And then in 1997 I started doing cadaver work. So trying to make this brief.
Yeah.
I worked with Shirley Hammond, Adela Morris, a bunch of really wonderful people that taught me a lot. And I still do cadaver with one of my dogs. So I've done that straight through from 97. area work I kept doing with my one dog, Glacier, and then I had another dog, Bishop, and I did area and cadaver with him. And then I wanted to try my hand in something to try to make a little money with my dogs. So I did vine mealy detection with a company I started called Insect Detection Dogs. And when I started to do that, I wanted a dog specifically working small scent. And so I reached out to Julia Priest. She gave me my first working dog that wasn't a rescue dog. The other two were kind of rescues. And it was Rixie. And we did vine mealybug in the orchard. For about 3 years, we had that company going. On the side, my husband was doing tracking with Rixie, just for fun with AKC. And then I retired my other dog, Bishop, from area and cadaver. And so I didn't have a search and rescue dog. I was like, I need to do something. So I started trailing with Rixie. And then I kind of got addicted to trailing. So I've been doing that. I'm on my third trailing dog. And so it's about every 10 years I seem to add a discipline. So I think it was in 2020, I added disaster work to it. So I started, and I'm with the task force out of Oakland with my one dog. So it's just sort of built along the way. And as far as my career behind the scenes, I'm a vet tech, veterinary technician through California. And I also have a degree in biological health science and then business management. I know it's an odd combination. But that's sort of what I did. And I worked in the vet clinic for several years. I was an ICU supervisor at a 24-hour clinic. And then I got into research. So I've worked my way around the research from doing the work in the labs to managing the people. And now I am the assistant director of what's called the IACUC, which is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee for UC Davis, which oversees all the research that's done with animals out there, which is controversial with some people as well. So it kind of crosses over with those realms, and that's where that came in.
You do your research is right now with UC Davis or UC Berkeley, you said, right?
I'm Davis now.
Davis.
I was Berkeley.
Okay. But is in regards to primates, correct?
I oversee a lot of the primate stuff, yeah.
Okay.
But my job is to oversee all of it, but I do focus a lot on the primate work.
One of the first things I want to go to is terminology, because in the dog world, there's a lot of terms that get cross-contaminated or however you want to say it. So give us tracking, trailing, area search, and anything else we miss besides cadaver, I would say. How do you define those terms, or what would you say the industry's definitions are for these?
I can't say industry. I can say mine.
Okay, go ahead.
So tracking to me is more footprint to footprint. So it's more precise. It's usually with the dog's nose down. It's more of an AKC, sometimes even to the, what it was called now, IPG, IPO.
Yes.
I don't know what
IPG.
it is anymore.
Yeah.
But
IGP.
That's more of the tracking. So it's more controlled, more contained, and more associating footprint, disturbed earth, and scent together. That's what tracking is to me. And I use it in the field when I feel like my dog's kind of lost the trail. I'll say, find the track. They'll put the nose down to try to find that combination of stuff. Trailing is more free for the dog. Usually, for me, it's for scent that's older than fresh because it moves when it gets aged. And the dogs have more liberty to move around. The style I've seen is very different. So one of my dogs works very nose down. One of my dogs works very head high. But it's more freedom to follow the scent versus the footprints because the scent moves. So that's tracking and trailing. Does that make sense to you?
Yep.
The differences?
And then,
okay.
Now, so that's what's the difference between trailing and area search?
Area, so both tracking and trailing are scent specific to me because even in AKC you have cross tracks with different people. So they should be scent specific. And I know that could go in a different way with you. And then area work is, I kind of describe it to the public as if you watch a field trial dog, they're out there looking for the birds. That's what it is. They're looking for a person. They're not scent specific in California, and they're off leash. And they will go right now. They go and they find the missing person. They report back to the handler and take them back to it. So it's
that's the find refind.
And they have a trained final response. A lot of the trailing dogs and tracking dogs in California do not have trained final response. Their final response is finding the person. So those are the differences that I've seen with those industries in my mind.
It's an interesting thing that you're bringing up, because it's the same thing in a lot of other professional worlds too, which is terminology creates confusion sometimes. And we kind of were talking about it before we got live with this, or we started recording it, was data collection. And the curious part I would have, I just as looking at it from the cop point of view, when we were doing what we call tracking and trailing ourselves, very similar definition to what you described, which side had the most success, because then that would probably drive what, and a lot of it is the anecdotal aspects that say what this works because I've trained my dog this way and I did this. There was a really interesting experience I had that I have never told this to you, but I'd be curious to see what you say. So, do you remember the name Dr. Steve McKenzie? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we were doing a police canine seminar, and Dr. McKenzie was asking the group, this was tracking, trailing specific in a sense, what were the chosen methodologies, right? So, like you said, the footprint style, more Schützen-like, food in the footsteps, versus those that did it a different way, or those that did the ID aspect, like here's a article, go find this person. And so he asked around the room, what their success was. Like, okay, you guys trained this way, what's been your success rate? You guys trained this way, what's your success rate? And he brought up a really cool way to look at it. So in that class, there was a large agency who trained a lot of the smaller agencies. They would go to them for the school. So by default, they all learned the same way. However, the outcomes were very different, which was unique. So his point was that the agency, the big agency, when he asked them what was their amount of calls for service for this type of work, they were getting 4 or 5 calls a week. The agency that was smaller, that trained that same group, what's your calls for service? They would get the same number of calls in the period of 3 to 4 months before they could reach that number that they would get in a week. And he just passed forward the idea of, could we potentially assume that the dog teaches itself what works, and then the agencies who have the high call volume, the dogs learn it faster and discover whatever the thing that works. And then the agency who does not have the same number of opportunities, it may take them much longer. So therefore, and he said, was it the training that led to the success, or was it the operational tempo that led to success? And that was the question. Like we could hypothesize right now, and the way that he brought that up, I found resonated really well, because I experienced that myself. Working as a trainer and a handler, the more calls you get, the more you can learn. Without as much experience, you don't know what works. You have assumptions. You're like, well, I think this worked, but you need more. You need more data. You need to see what happens. So what I find that's really unique in this is we kind of had that conversation. Experience is one of the best teachers. But so often we get so hyper focused on definitions. We get so hyper focused on a methodology. So what would you say, what would be, going into the experience realm, what is some of the biggest takeaways that you've had from what you've done in a methodology to what you've experienced operationally? And how much has crossed over to you, do you feel? And what was something that you took away that was a lesson learned? Like, in theory, I thought that would work really well, but I've learned now through experience, this is what I do, or this is what I've gone through. I'm trying to give it more narrow point here. Just give it, like, has there been a lesson that you've walked away from and you went, I'm going to make an adjustment because
every single
real
search.
Life. Yeah.
Every single search.
Okay.
Every single search I've come away with something I need to change. So there's a balance, though, between constantly adding new things to your dog and changing things and keeping that foundation strong. So I use the 3-to-1 ratio, right? You want 3 kind of, you got it, and then 1 hard one. So, there's been lessons like one of the recent searches I had. The people went out and they were on a trail and it was really nice and easy. And then they lost the trail. And so they spent a day trying to look for the trail. And then, so they spent the night in this marshy trail area. I've not worked it where somebody goes off my trail and then for a whole day goes back and forth. is it fair for my trailing dog to ask her to try to find a trail in an area that's basically crosshatched? So then she has to turn into an area dog, right? And work the scent pool and try to find the trail on the other side, right? So it's every search I learn something from. And it's trying not to constantly find the negative, but try to find the strengths and continue to go, okay, this is something we need to work on. And this is how we're going to do that, make a plan for it. And this is how we're going to keep that foundation strong. But that's the biggest thing, is the foundation and making sure you do incremental improvements of your dog. So I like to call them drills.
Yeah.
So like I'll do little drills for the improvement sections of them.
So, I mean, you have obviously a scientific mind, scientific education. What would be, how would you, how do you construct a training model for yourself or for others that you work with, applying some of the things that come from science versus the typical thing we say is that's the way we've always done it. Yeah. How do you merge your background and lessons that have come from science and apply it to the search and rescue, tracking, trailing worlds?
Well, it's the methods and methodologies is probably the biggest one, and also one variable at a time. And I don't know if it's science necessarily that gives me that. I mean, having a kid, it's like, okay, they had an allergic reaction to it. Was it the peaches or was it the applesauce, right? So you kind of got to go back to deciphering one variable at a time, change it, and see how it affects the dog. So it's more planning and organizing, and then getting the data from that, and then going, how did that work? Did it work? Did it not work? And I think a lot of handlers do that. I don't know if that's a scientific mind to it. The scientific comes in when they actually have me helping them with projects, which is fantastic, but that's a hard one to get to do.
Yeah. Let me see. I'm trying to think of another one. What would you say, what was a search that you went through that just had a profound experience on you that drove you to either make a change or it was just a strong lesson learned? What's something in your background that you said, wow, that search, I have a huge takeaway from that, whether it be a failure or a success?
Well, okay. I mean, I have a couple of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're always changing, and you need to do more double blinds so that you read your dog better. But most of them have been able to trust my dog. So there's been two big ones that really was like, God, my dog was on, and I didn't read it right. So, and two of them also is oddly that my dog turned from trailing to cadaver on their own, without me giving them any clues. Both of them were in Yosemite. Okay. But one of them was that she was trailing the missing subject, and then she was pretty linear and nose down. And when she works, both of my dogs, when they work, they're pretty linear. And when they switch into air scent mode, they go more circuitous, and they just the more less linear. They can circle, or they can
more bracketing and things like that. Okay.
So she did a head pop, and then she looked over this river, and she dove in the river, went across the river, and I had to have her wait for me. And then from there, she was just head up, and you could see her almost like trying to follow the scent in the air, kind of like I call it dancing. So I unclipped her, and she went right to this vertical wall and was trying to climb the vertical wall. And so I marked it on the map, but my assignment was to check trailheads and see if like the intersections. And so I stopped her, and I went back and checked the intersections and got negatives and a negative, and I got a positive on another one, but it just went up this one creek. And I came back to base and I reported it. And there was another guy named Bill McCauley, who's fabulous. He was my flanker for part of that. I lost him because he had to go flank somebody else. And they said, what should we do? The helicopter has one more flight. What would she do? And he said, you should go to where Zinka stopped on that vertical wall. They said, okay, and they went there, and the person was literally like 500 feet on the vertical wall above where my dog was. And I don't think he got there by where she went. So she switched from trailing to cadaver. And so that's a huge lesson to me of try to not to make the dog perform to your expectations on a search. Let them perform, and you have to read what they're doing. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but it's also that from that one, I actually ended up putting cadaver next to my trail. So I'd have a trail go down, and the person would be carrying some cadaver source. Obviously, it's not them, so it's not scent-specific cadaver. And so they would put the cadaver off to the side, and I wanted to see, while she's trailing, will she go find cadaver as well? Because that's important to know. So that's one change I made in my trainings, where I don't do it all the time, but every now and then you'll do that. There's been other ones where a lot of the times people go over cliffs. And so how does your dog behave when it goes over the cliff? I've really tried to get someone to like go and hide and rappel and then hang off the cliff for an hour for me. Nobody's willing to do that. But having people go down steep drainages and stuff like that. So most of the time from a search, I'll then incorporate a training to make the person hide similar to where they are. So
no, it's good. I mean, one of the things, even myself, I've had to adjust some thinking in the sense of, first, dogs are amazing creatures, and we don't give them a lot of times enough credit for all the things that they can do. With that said, there's really good arguments and position stances for being very skill specific. So kind of when I first encountered the search and rescue world, one of the first questions I had was this dual purpose aspect of doing live find, then doing cadaver. And then over time, I've kind of learned, okay, yep, it can be done. And like anything else, a lot comes down to selection of dog and handler and so on and so forth. So there's variables there that can be figured out and can show that it's successful. On the other side of that is the disciplines that are very specific also have great success because of the clarity that goes on there. So I look at, like, your story that you gave was, again, it comes down to team specific. Can we do this? Versus sometimes I think of when we create standards sometimes and we say you must do this to do this, we also could be limiting ourselves. And I get both sides. Like, I understand the why an organization may say we want you to do live find before you do anything else, because it's if you look at it, it's a skill set that is easier, I think, to learn, the live find aspect. It's motivating for dogs in many aspects and how it's trained. But at the same time, as people get skilled, then they want to go do the other thing. And in the search and rescue world, that usually leads to cadaver in some way or form or fashion. There was, when you were talking about your story there about, your story, mixed in your story was also definitions we talked about. And there was a thing that I went through one time, because, again, coming from the police dog world, the guy that we learned from was very Schutzhund background oriented. And we did all of our training for weeks and months was, footstep, hot dogs in the heels, and being very specific and so forth. Then fast forward a number of years, then Malinois became more popular, and we all kind of struggled with the Mals doing that kind of same very detailed type of searching compared to the German Shepherds. So one of my good friends his nickname was Big Country. He's a country boy from Tennessee, and very animal aware and very animal smart. And when he got his Dutch Shepherd, he and I were debating tracking techniques. He was going more of like a trailing style, and I was staying true to what I was taught. And it came to a head. We just basically said one night, okay, fine. He goes, you lay your track wherever you want. We'll pretend there's a perimeter set up, so you're not going to go past these areas, but go wherever you want to within this area. So I lay this elaborate track. I'm going down sidewalks, crossing roadways, jump over a business's wall, walk over their bridge that they had over a koi pond, then back over the wall, then kind of hit an area where I could watch them start. This is back in the day of Nextel, so I Nextel him, okay, I'm in position. He begins a search. I see him start off, but I lose him because of the position I'm in, so I can't see where he goes. But the way I'm expecting him was to come from behind where I was set up. All of a sudden, he comes out of my right-hand side through the woods over here. He's like, got you, bitch. And I was like, oh, dude, but you missed like half of my track and da-da-da-da. He goes, I don't give a fuck. My job is to find you. Mm-hmm. And I was like, but your dog's head was up. And he's like, my dog's head was up and down. He's like, at certain points he was down, other points he's like, I want my dog to have the freedom to use what works. Who am I to say nose should be down? Who am I to say his nose should be up? all I want him to do is if like, and he used search and rescue, is like, if someone's in my grid area, I want to know my dog will lead me to them.
Yes.
And that was the point. And that resonated with me, and it made me change how I looked at it and realized that the more we give the dogs the freedom to solve the problem, the better it is. Back to Dr. McKenzie's point, which was the real life experience taught them a lot of things. And now with that, I've been doing lots of years of detection, and I've gone back and forth between what I would call a clinical scientific approach, data collection, imprinting using wheels, walls, etc. All I think are good things. But like anything else, no matter what it is you do, if we get too stuck on one side, the end results may suffer in a sense. And the example I want to give is like, the more you do searches operationally, or like you said, double blind, man, does it really start showing what's working and what's not working. Yep. And that now, as I do a lot of things, and I know we're on the same page in this, I share, in some cases, and I have to give some caveat, I don't necessarily care what you do. Let's just see what the results are.
Yep.
And that will always speak the loudest. You know, whether it's tracking, whether it's trailing, whether it's this style, direct, indirect, indication, no indication, whatever it is, can you do it? When the chips are down and you're asked to go out there with your dog, can you and your dog navigate the problem and have a positive result? And positive result can mean there's nothing there, and you correctly said that. And positive result is I found what was out there and correctly did so.
That's all really, really strongly based on what tools you've provided the dog. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't worked double blinds or negatives and your dog isn't comfortable giving you a negative, they'll overhunt.
Yes.
Take you on what people have different terms for, ghost trail, take you for a walk, whatever they want to call it. So you got to make sure your dog, to me, has all the tools you want them to use. And then once, sort of like teaching a sit and a down, once they contextually understand how to do all of these things, then it's up to them to figure out which one's best in the field. Mm-hmm. So I strongly believe in teaching them everything you might expect them to use in the field. So that's why I do start with tracking. Mm-hmm. And then once I feel like they understand what I want, then I let them do trailing. And that usually they alternate on their own. You'll see it in the videos where they'll be head up and then they'll be head down. And just because they're nose down doesn't mean they're on a track. It could be the scent's pooled down there. So I love to say my dogs find people, but they're searching scent. Mm-hmm. So they're finding scent. Mm-hmm. And so I want to make sure they tell me where the scent is. And then it's I have to sort of decipher how the scent got there. Hopefully they'll figure it out too. But I like to give them the different tools. So tracking, trailing, article indication, whatever you want them to do in the field. I kind of feel like it's awesome to let them figure it out, but they only are going to be able to use what you've provided them to learn.
Yeah, no, it's important. I mean, and we like you said, show them or teach them some of the techniques or tools that they can use to solve the problem. This goes into the next bigger part of it is selection of the right type of dog to do this work. Coming into the search and rescue world, it's a mixture of there's a professional side and there's a volunteer side. I think both are extremely important, but I think, and you can tell me if I'm off base on this, the volunteer side of things is a great thing, but I don't think the volunteer side gets the needed support or educational support that they should have.
Yep.
How do you guys navigate that in that search and rescue world? What ideas are being kicked around? What can we do better to support the volunteer force? Should we create standards? Should there be some kind of at least baseline standard for, like some other countries have, when it comes to reaching obviously a certain benchmark before you can say you're operational? How do we navigate that world? Because I hear on one side of the equation is, ooh, we don't want to tell volunteers no, or there's a standard because then we lose volunteers. Now, in most of my travels, I've never seen a shortage of teams, right? I see usually more than necessary, or maybe ones that I would question really could actually do an operational deployment. I love their enthusiasm. I love that they want to do something with their dog, and I love the fact that they want to help out their society. But also be real about potential limitations that exist. So in your opinion, what are some things that we can do to kind of uplift or support the volunteer force? Is there things within government or organizations? Should we come up with a form of a standard in some way? What do you think?
Well, there are standards.
Okay.
So, I mean, California, at least, they have, Cal OES has their standards, and every team that wants to search in California is supposed to meet those standards, whether you're a sheriff department, CARTA, Monterey, whatever it is. I don't know much outside of California, but I know there's other standards like Search Dog Foundation, National Search Dog Foundation. So I know there's other standards out there, NAPWADA, IPWADA.
PenVet.
Yeah, there's all sorts of standards out there, but there's some that don't have any. Like some counties are really remote, and it's, he's got a bloodhound, it doesn't need to do anything. And so I don't know if there's a way to do that other than if all law enforcement agencies agreed on something. I think you start small, get like your county to do it and then get your state to do it. But going back to the selection thing, I think the way people could help, if there was a way, is to give some sort of funding for people to go to trainings so that we could have the handlers being trained. Because there's a lot of options. We do a lot of seminars. People are holding seminars for working the discipline. So you'll go to a trailing seminar, you'll go to an area seminar, and they have courses in there, but it's not a program. So if there was a way to get handlers through programs, it's great. But as volunteers, it's all our own money. I want to stay married. I want to stay having a house. So I need to balance how much I spend on my volunteer activity, which happens to be very expensive, versus kind of like horses, I think, are very expensive too. So it's a very expensive hobby. So my thing would be that we educate the handlers more and give them more of a program for the handlers. I mean, we have a good program for the handlers, but it's skills-oriented, not task-oriented, sort of, or if that's saying that right. So that, you do ropes classes, you do helicopter classes, litter classes, but we're not having handlers learn how to train the dog. It's a hand-me-down, as you said. It's wherever the group's teaching is going. I'm seeing a lot of Californians, certain regions, are going to seminars a lot. So they'll come to your seminars, and I think that's fantastic because they're learning outside of what they commonly know. And the more tools you can give the handler, the more tools the handler can give the dog. And so the more well-rounded the whole team will become.
Yeah, so, and what you're bringing up is one of those things that we talked about too, is it didn't matter what the dog world program was, whether it be law enforcement, search and rescue, sport world, we have a tendency to tribe up naturally. And the point you just made, the ability to cross-pollinate information is a great thing. And of course, obviously the internet and social media does a lot of that, to the point now where the double-edged sword exists, where there's so much information, and if you're a new person, what do you follow? What do you believe? Because there's so much there. But what I really like that you brought up is there needs to be in the investment in the handler education towards the dog, as well as all the safety aspects and job-related aspects, which you said those kind of mechanisms are in place. Like you said, whether it's rope classes, rappelling, there's a lot of functional stuff for handlers when it comes to the world of safety, search and rescue, so forth. But in comparison to that world, to the education of handlers, that's another area that is, if we had some kind of, like you said, grant system or some kind of, there's a lot of nonprofits in the dog world, heavily related to the dog, less related to handler education and professionalism, for lack of a better term. And when we look at that side of the equation, what would you say are areas that could use some focus towards handler education? What are some, if you were designing or wanted to send handlers to a class and it was going to be completely paid for, what topic classes would you look for and say, hey, as a trainer in my organization or in my region or whatever it is, I think it's really important handlers go learn X. What would you say X is?
That's a very good question. It's all about how the dogs are learning. So I think, some of your classes are phenomenal for that on the K9 cognition. It's also important to learn how to reward the dog properly. So a lot of people they see another person's being successful and they're like, oh, they reward their dog with this, so that's how I have to do my dog. And every dog's a little different. So I think, your canine cognition class is great. As I said, Craig Schultz is going to put not meaning to plug him on your thing, but he's doing a Pay That Dog seminar, which is how to reward properly at proper times. And I think that's what we need to learn. And the biggest lesson people need to learn is that failure is opportunity for growth. And stop hiding the failures, because we all have weaknesses. Every one of us, every one of our dogs, and as a team. And we need to recognize that and go, okay, we need to focus on our strengths so we don't lose our confidence, right? But you need to sit there and go, okay, this is where we failed and why. Back chain that and go, why is that a failure? And then build that foundation back up. Because as you strengthen one leg, the other leg gets a little weak, then you strengthen that one. And it's constant balance of getting that dog to be really, really well functioning in the field, and you to be well functioning. And I would say teaching them to be patient and let the dog work. Because I'm on different teams. And so that's sort of where I've learned a lot. Because what I've done with my volunteer state team, CARTA, is way different than what I'm doing with FEMA. And watching the handlers work, because the task force I'm on, most of their dogs come from Search Dog Foundation. So they have all their training done there. So I thought it was some cult when I first started coming out. Because they're like, the foundation says this and the foundation says that. I'm like, what is the foundation?
Right?
Who is the foundation? Yes. And now they've opened up, and I think it's awesome. Search Dogs opened up their foundation for everybody to come train. And I think it's amazing, because I've been on searches where the dogs haven't really been exposed to the environment enough. So the rubble or the boulders or the mud, and the dogs will hesitate to go in it. So they're more focused on survival than they are working. And so you're not going to have a really good outcome if the dog's just trying to survive while they're searching versus searching. So I would say, teaching the handlers to be patient and to observe the dog work, and how to know when to step in to help and when to not. Because there are some times we do need to help them. They're our partners. But most of the time, it's basically giving them a break is the biggest thing to do.
Yeah. There's definitely some things that I took away as you mentioned that, and there's a lot of parallels to the detection dog world, which is the skill set of being able to read the dog.
Yep.
I think that's a skill set that gets way overlooked. I think a lot of times focus goes heavily towards an indication or some type of outcome, especially more on the detection side of things. This would go into your human remains detection dogs, where they get so focused on an indication and they're missing out on all of the really important changes of behaviors that are all predictable, repeatable, reliable to me as a handler to know there's something there. And that comes kind of as a direct result of the lack of running searches that are either double blind, single blind, etc., or the expectation that it's training, and therefore this outcome is going to be this way, versus getting pushed into the uncomfortable space of, I don't know the answer, who I'm with doesn't know the answer, all we can do is figure this out. But like you pointed out, there's so many good lessons that come from that. And I've recently even put myself back in those positions. And I absolutely love it. And like you said, it's so important to embrace those failures.
Yep.
Throw the ego aside. I think
please.
every
Yes.
dog handler knows we go through failures all the time. And like you said, how we address or how we feel about it kind of sometimes takes away or overshadows a lesson that should have been learned.
Yep.
We get so focused on, oh, that sucked. I looked bad in front of my peers.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I don't want to do that again. So then there's this hesitation to, when all of a sudden it's harder, people don't want to go deploy their dog or train in front of others because of that. Well, I don't want to look bad, or I'm afraid this outcome, whatever it is, versus going, yep, I'm the first one, let's go. And let's just see how it happens. I've been there. I totally get it. I understand it. It sucks. But now I turn around and go, I will happily put myself in a position because I want to see what I get out of it.
Yeah.
I want to learn. I want to learn, where am I making mistakes? Most cases, it's not the dog, it's the human. When we look at where the problems really exist.
Yep.
There's a little meme I have coming out. It might be out in the next week or two, but basically what it is, it's a handler looking down at the dog. It's like a detection dog relationship, and it's the handler saying, "It's not you, it's me," because that is so much of it is it's us.
Yes.
And our fears, our lack of understanding. So starting off, I guess the bigger point that we're both kind of sharing is the importance of educational aspects with, it's good to understand methodologies and it's good to understand sometimes the why of what's occurring. But I think a fundamental thing that you highlighted that gets overlooked is the ability to read the dog.
Yep.
Just this simple thing, is something there and not there. And the amazing part is so many handlers can actually really read their dogs. They just haven't been put in a situation to read their dog in that way. Because I'll ask handlers, how does your dog tell you it has to go outside? How does the dog tell you when the toy rolled under the sofa or under the table? There's all these things they can tell you. It looks like this, it looks like this, it looks like this, because they've been through it. But at the same time, they don't feel as confident in knowing the answer of something is there or not there.
The negative.
Yes, because that goes into my next question is, so in the detection dog world, the use of a controlled negative or blank search has definitely increased over the past number of years. How about the tracking trailing world?
Absolutely.
How is that starting to happen? What would you say should be done? How might they approach training a all clear negative track? How do you go about doing that in your world?
Yep. So, I mean, I want to go back to a couple things with you, because I think it's important to have humility as a handler. So that's a huge thing. And the more you go on searches, the less ego you have. So it's like,
you get humbled real fast.
You get humbled real quick. You should. You should. If you don't, then you need to self-reflect a little. Go to some meditation class or something.
Yes.
And then the ability to read the dog. And it's not just the ability to read the dog, it's ability to believe what you're reading, because there's a lot of time on a search that somebody will go out and their dog will be telling them something, but in their mind they're like, the subject would never do that. So you get that, you need to take your mind out of it. I mean, I joke that some of the best searches I've been on like all of the NyQuil that you could be on, and I'm just like completely fogged out and I'm just following my dog. And the other one I wanted to hit on was the change of behavior. Most of the finds I've had is because of a change of behavior in my dog. They're still trying to figure out the scent pool, and we find the person. And so there's been a few that are really clean, but most of the time you're looking for the change of behavior, not the trained final response. And the final one I want to hit back on, and then we'll get back to, you got to remind me what your question was, but is that this might be really controversial for some people, but people are told don't tell about scent. Like if your dog has scent interest, and they're saying don't talk about interest. And I said, I really think the handler needs to be aware of where the interest is. That's a clue. That's like saying don't pay attention to that wallet you just found, right? I mean, if the dog is getting interest, you need to figure out, so if it's a wallet that's been found, is it the person's wallet? So if it's an area dog, are there other ground teams in the area? Try to figure out what that scent's coming from. If it's a scent-specific dog, then you should know that's from your subject. So where is it coming from? What direction is the wind going in? What, all that type of stuff. So I think we need to start, maybe you don't report it, but you need to at least acknowledge it and try to figure out on your own what that scent interest is.
And do it in training so that way it can be talked about. And what you go through at that point is a safe area versus trying to figure out on a real search.
That's where the double blinds come in. And absolutely, at least I can only speak for my group, we are definitely doing negatives for trailing as well. One of those is the direction of travel exercise we have, where you have 3 intersections. 2 of them are positive, 1 of them's negative. You don't know which ones are which, and you have to go figure it out, and you have to call it as you're going. And there's no person at the end in the urban environment, which is a lot of the cases on searches.
So it means there's no track laid whatsoever, or is it just nobody at the end of it?
So you have 3 intersections.
Okay.
1 has nobody at all, and then the other 2 have somebody at it, and you have to follow which direction they went.
Okay.
One of those has somebody else contaminating it, but most of the time in urban environments, there's a lot of people contaminating. You don't need a cross layer. So, but you have to call it as you're going. It's blind, double blind. When you first do it, it's pretty scary.
Sure.
Right? Because you're making a call and then you can't take it back. So if you get to the next one and you called the first one negative, you get to the next one, that one feels negative. Do you call it a negative because you feel like it's a negative, or, so it's a very eye-opening event of why aren't they accurate or not? But you have to do the double blinds. You have to teach the dogs to give you, well, not to give you a negative, but you need to be able to read the dog that they're not getting sent. I'm not somebody, this is another controversial thing.
Sure.
I do not ask my dogs for an indication of a negative. I read their body language and I call it when I feel like they have nothing. So I will let them hunt and I will let them hunt, and then I'll go, good girl, all done. And then we go to where the trail is, because I don't want them determining when they stop working. So that's sort of my thing is I determine when they're working and when they're not working. So
no, that's an important point. What you bring up there is I started sharing a very similar thing in detection, which is I always have my signal or my cue to start my search. That's usually souk for my dog. I've now more recently started incorporating an end of search cue. All done.
that's what I have.
Yeah, and that just tells my dog that we're all done for that moment.
Yep.
I can restart at any point in time I want to, but if I have a cue to start, I want to have a cue to finish.
Yep.
Because it also gives me the ability to reward something. In this case, it could be a lack of something. Great job. There's nothing here.
Yes.
All done. Let's go play. Or all done. I can have I also have a safety recall built in. So here means come back to me. So I have basically, there's 3 ways to end a search. You find something.
Yes.
You don't find something and I end it by the cue, or emergency recall, safety purposes. Those are the 3. You also kind of highlighted the thing I wanted to ask more clearly. So do you guys ever do a training setup where you say, hey, we believe the person took off from this direction, here's the area we have, but nobody did anything?
Yep.
So there's a complete negative. So we don't get to take the dog back out and go find. It is just straight up negative.
Yep.
So you guys do have something like that. Okay.
Yeah, and it's very difficult for the first time trainers.
Oh,
to
yeah,
do
for
that.
sure.
Especially
I know it was for
because
me.
you imply that something's there. So, but that is where you're going to, because that's a big mistake on a search. If you are in a negative area and your dog gives you a positive direction.
Yes.
So that's, and the dogs have to learn that though. The dogs have to learn that there's not always something there.
Correct.
So it's a lesson for the handler and a lesson for the dog. And I agree 100%. I have it all done. It's similar to if you have a sit command, you have free, right? You don't.
Release them
they
from the
just
position.
don't sit there the entire time. So I give them commands for what they're doing. So
Yeah, I do a whole thing on it, but anyway, there's, like I said, rituals, habituations, cues and signals, condition reinforcers. There's different ways we can communicate, and they all have a specific type of meaning.
Right.
But the more we communicate in a sense of creating clarity is important. There's a downside of communicating too much. That's the opposite. That's where the argument would come in. Someone goes, "Oh, I don't want somebody talking to the dog too much," and I totally agree with that.
Yeah, that's videos.
But there's nothing wrong with saying start, and there's nothing wrong with saying stop.
you also have to give them breaks. So for searches,
For sure.
for search and rescue at least, they're I can't speak for law enforcement, but sometimes they're really long, multi-day searches, and you need to read. Your dog communicates by its body language. You have to be able to read that, give them a proper break, and then have them be able to start again.
Yeah.
So they can't always do that, right? Sometimes if you haven't trained it, when you stop them for a break, they think they're done. So you need to, everything you do on a search, you got to implement into your trainings.
Yep. Yeah, I love that, because it's a thing I try to teach more of now is let's put the handler and dog through this concept or this scenario in training, so that way we can identify any gaps that exist. And this is a safe place to go through that versus finding out on a real deployment.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of times, though, training is set up, like you said earlier, for lots of easy wins and feeling good about ourselves, or maybe feeling good for the dog. And a rut kind of develops where it's training day, the dog knows it's training, it's the certain areas we go to. There's a number of different things. I call it the K9 cheat code. But the dogs will learn a lot of these things, and it tells them the outcome.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, when it's the real deal, many of these things don't exist, and now there's a struggle because we haven't shown the dog what that's like, or in some cases shown the handler what's that like. So really important aspect. Now, I
have a story on that one.
Please go right ahead. Please go ahead.
We had a training we set up, and it was me and another lady, Allison. We decided to just get to training early, leave scent articles on our hoods, and go disappear. And they weren't prepared for that, right? We had a radio so they could call us, and it was a very, very difficult, humbling night for them. It was windy. We'd been out there a while. We just brought our books. We just sat out for a couple hours. And they had a very, very humbling experience. But we sat down as a team and went over why did it happen, what do we need to do, and we did drills to try to improve those. Then they went on a search, and they had the exact similar experience, and they said, oh my God, it was so helpful to have had that training in a safe environment where I could then decipher why did my dog do this. And so it was setting up those trainings that are hard, humbling, whatever you want to call them, oh shit factors, whatever you want to call them. Those are super important to have because you're going to have them on searches.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's super important to have that. Okay, so the other one I have now, let's get into the world of scent identification. And I guess I'll start off with, so describe to those who may not be totally clear on it, what scent ID is, and then I'll go into pros and cons of deployment aspects of that.
Define scent ID.
So like the way you guys would say is the dog is given an article and it's only following scent specific.
Okay.
So
that's something you have to train like consistently. So I only do it with trailing. I've never done it with an area dog, and it's something consistently you need to do. And we were talking earlier about familiar scent versus non-familiar scent. So we always ask people to come out and train with us that aren't in our training group. So we have an agreement, well, not an agreement, but there's another group called SAR that's local, and we've had them on searches as flankers, people that support us. So now they're coming out to hide for us. So it's people my dog has never met before, family members, whatever you want. When we did the UC Berkeley trials, those were all students we'd never met.
That's perfect.
So you need to make sure you train and have that set up so that you'll have like two people walking together and they split off, and your dog's supposed to find one of those, making sure they do scent discriminate. We do this off of the dogs too. So we'll work two dogs and the trails will go the same and the subjects go different. One dog works this one dog works that one. One day, dog A go first, so that dog B has to split off of dog A. Next training, dog B goes first and has to split off of dog A. So it's constantly trying to be aware of what you're putting out there and making sure your dog is following what you've asked them to do. But it's like you have to do it all the time, because otherwise you're not sure what they're doing. So and you have to have decoys out there. You can't just have your person out there. You have to have decoys and you have to have contamination.
Yeah, you're bringing up another point that was like the science world, when it has looked at this scent-specific, scent ID kind of concept, there's been some really good positive results from it. Some of the things that Dr. Ade Schoen had shown with the evidence collection and ID, that was one big part of it. It later went through some other things, but that wasn't necessarily related to what the dog capabilities were. There was some other things that happened. In the tracking trailing world, I have seen where success in doing it, and I've also seen the same things that some of the science has tested and went, okay, why isn't it not working as good as you said it was based on what we described? There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the really unique things I took away from, and you hit it, on the science thing that they did when they purposely tested, was they brought in individuals that had nothing to do with anybody in the search and rescue field. They weren't even driven by them. There was like no connection whatsoever. Super cool to see that, because that's the real world part of it. You know, the person we're looking for usually would have no connection whatsoever. I understand sometimes it's just really easy to grab our people we're working with, and and again, that rut we create because of the ease part of it versus putting somebody in charge of, like in your case, you reached out to students at a university, or as I've seen, I've seen even with the on the research side of things, they just put an ad on Facebook. Yeah, hey, looking for volunteers to do a cool tracking project with dogs. People showed up. So there's ways to get creative, and I think sometimes I don't want to call it laziness, or just convenience sake. So when it comes to convenience, sometimes we go this route versus, it takes some work, takes some creativity. Let's figure this out. It also
goes a little bit to, if you want to think about it with a contextual version of a dog. So if you have a problem and you want to help fix it, sometimes it's better to go to something that's familiar because they feel safer. It's more. So if that one variable thing, again, if you go back to the one variable thing. So if you're trying to work on a new problem, you want to do it in positions that they're comfortable with. And once you get it functioning well there, then you go outside. Similar to teaching a dog to sit, you do it at home in the kitchen, then you do it at your yard, then you take it outside,
Yep.
right? So it's the same thing that you're doing something in a familiar, safe place. So the other one you kind of hit on is the scent article collection. That is a huge issue because a lot of them are contaminated. So ruling out what making sure your scent article is collected properly. And then there's the debate going on, when you're training, do you get the scent article to match the age of the trail, or are you getting it fresh? So there's things that you might not be thinking about, but in my mind, I'm like, okay, it should match the trail. You should get an aged scent article. And then you have to be, how do you store it, all that good stuff.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's actually a really good point, because one of the things that I know when I was talking to Dr. Tiedemann and Dr. Hall, when we were just making the observations on some of that actual spot you mentioned there, the collection and storage, it was unique. We would see handlers that would have the scent ID thing in their pocket in a Ziploc bag, whip it out, do this, and we were thinking to ourselves, there's some questions there.
Yeah.
Yeah. One, we already know scientifically the Ziploc bag is fraught with all kinds of potential issues to think about. The other part is it's been in the handler's pocket. Should that be something of concern? And then the other thing is, like you said, the item that we've collected or that's given on the real world side of things, it's what the family members or somebody gives you. How were they holding it? What were they doing? Oh, there's a bunch. So then this leads me to the question, how often do you guys do training where you don't have a scent ID or a scent discrimination item or ID item?
We always have a scent article.
So how do you,
I'm a bagger. I put it in my pocket
Okay.
with a bag, and that's how I train.
Yep.
So I think that's how my dog's used to it. I know I did the osmosis thing, as you can see, where everything leashes out.
Yeah.
But they're both used to doing it that way. But we never train without a scent article. We might train with a scent article with a person not there for the negatives.
Yep.
So like I could grab your scent today and go to training tomorrow and go, hey, has Cameron been here? And the dog should all go, nope, he hasn't been here. So it's all, again, it goes back to training. Have you trained it that way or not that way? I am not going to carry a glass jar in my pocket.
No.
So,
but would you say as realistically, the item has it, like, again, I'm pulling experiences from around the world where those have done it different ways. And I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong way, but there's things I would look at as like, that makes sense, or that has some good protocols assigned to it. So collection is done following a certain protocol. So if obviously we know Johnny's missing, Johnny's family is the one who's alerted law enforcement or the local entities that Johnny's missing, and now you guys are there, the search and rescue teams are there. I've seen where there's the team that goes and collects an item, like meets with the family and says, okay, we would like to have something to help us. That individual or team of people follow protocols in that collection and storage. And then they bring that item to the search area, and any of the dogs that need to go basically sniff this before beginning the search will have that available to them. I'm assuming right now we may not, in the United States, some areas may not be at a level where they follow, or there's any kind of written protocol for the collection. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I don't think there is one right now. I mean, I've sort of trained, like Yosemite does it a certain way because I'm the training dog out there. But it's sort of what my ideal training article or search article would be is something that only the subject's touched, preferably. If somebody else has touched it, that person hasn't been in the field. That's preferable. And then, like the last search I had, the guy collected the article perfectly. He got like 2 sweatshirts. There was 2 people missing, and he has sweatshirts there, and then he has gauze sitting in there. So the dogs aren't smelling the sweatshirt, because then you're leaving
Could be other things.
traces of the dog on all of the articles, right? And you use tongs and gloves. So that's the ideal, where it's sitting there percolating with the source, and it can contaminate. And then you get it, and I put it in Ziplocs. I double bag them, put them in my pocket.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how I do it. We've done because I've had it where we go to searches and it's very contaminated. So I've had it a couple different ways, and this was shown in the Mark Rober video, and it was proven with the UC Berkeley trials, so that you could have 3 people start from the same area. Your dog follows one person, We don't know who they are. We find the person and we call in and hopefully, hey, I found Maria. Did I find the right person?
Yeah.
So we've done that, and then I've also had searches where everybody was everywhere, and everybody, like all these people went into the car, and so I had them do a lineup. So I got the sent article, and then I did a lineup of all the officers. My dog checks all those people and magically finds the missing person, that's missing from that scent. And you can practice that at training where you have 5 people here. We all hand the gauze to each other, and then one of us goes missing, and you start the dog, and the dog smells everybody here and goes finds the missing person. And it's very helpful to set those up in training. So does that answer?
Yeah, well, I think what we kind of highlighted there is there's some things that deserve deeper research.
Absolutely. We need to do way more on that.
Yeah. Is there can we come up with a best practices model for the collection? Because right now, from what we can gather, both in our experiences and what we've seen, is there's a lot of assumptions. Yeah. And from what we see, the dogs, sometimes it affirms that assumption. Some of that might be we might be facing some cognitive bias that could be occurring, which we want to try to eliminate. But overall, or the overreaching part of it, I think, is there needs to be some more research done. More specifically, on my first thing would be, how do we collect the items? What's the best way to do it? What's the best way to give the dog the ability to smell the thing that we really want them to smell and not be affected by something else? And then test these things. Kind of like, so right now we've done some testing, and we see some discrepancies between training reality, I call it, with how the person feels about it, and then the reality of the tests that are showing different results. And then when looking at data from real deployments, there's a huge lack of data from real deployments.
Deployments are hard. So I did write an article. I think it's in Cop Magazine on Scent Article Collection. So I have one out there. And I think there's a sharing of knowledge that hasn't been done. So I'd love to hear how other people do it, because it's like, okay, this is what I do. And does it work? But then there's also training. As I said, training needs to match reality. So how many times do you go to training and you go missing from me and I go here and I hand you gauze and you go like this and you put it in the bag and then you leave? Versus when we go to a search, the person's not available to wipe down. So you got to wipe down their car. The hard part is none of the searches have been the same. So you can't say you always need to collect from a shoe.
Sure.
Because you're
limited.
You have a camper that's missing, so you have a tent. What's left in the tent? Did they share the tent? So there's all these variables that you need to factor in.
Which leads me to the question. That's why I asked that question. Do you guys ever deploy without a scent article?
Have to have.
Because as a cop, on our tracking trailing side of things, more often than not, we don't get anything.
Yep. I think that might be adrenaline. I'm not sure. But
that's actually a great point. Okay. So there's an aspect when it's a criminal type of deployment. We have, and again, more data needs to be done on this, but there are anecdotal evidence that we go through as handlers. And because the example you're giving is, we could have a perimeter set up. We know somebody robbed this place or jumped out of a stolen vehicle or whatever it is. But they're now in this huge swath of land potentially, or a neighborhood or whatever it is. And what we're trying to do with our dog is go from where they were last seen or where they ran from the individual and go follow that and see if we can find that person in that space, whatever that is. And back to our earlier conversation, those who get lots of experience and in some of these cases where it's contact by bite, which is self-reinforcing for a lot of dogs, helps that dog go, ooh, I can tune out all the cops. I can tune out the neighbors who are standing in their yard because they hear the helicopter up or they see the lights. I can tune out all those things and hone in on this one. And I can clearly tell you, and many of my colleagues will tell you, your first few deployments, you don't have that yet, unless you've got an experienced dog. You and your dog kind of learn that, and you and your dog learn to hunt together.
Yep.
I can tell you, like a few times, my dog led me to the area. I found the person by the dog getting me there because my dog was working. I saw a boat over here, and under the boat was the person. My dog hadn't got to the boat yet. we were in the backyard. I'm thinking, I see the boats. I get my dog towards that direction a little bit. Dog picks it up, and then boom, we got it.
But how are you going to set that up in training? You're going to ask all the neighbors to come out, the helicopter come out for training?
So how we did it in training was we would go to neighborhoods at night.
Yeah.
And now we had the same problem that many search and rescue do as well. Our track layers, in many cases, were fellow cops or somebody in some way attached to us. Or the person was probably wearing some type of protective gear for the bite, if there was a bite. There's a good balance now. We were balancing it out back then as not every deployment required apprehension. It required location. That's the primary job. So we balance it out. But in the beginning, when you're new and you don't know better, you want to see your dog make contact and bite, and it becomes, then you realize, oh crap, that's too focused that way. So back to the whole premise of a lot of the things we talked about, there's a balance to a lot of these things. But as we got, what we had to learn was, we didn't have something to start with. We had to kind of use our cop intuition. And the other thing that you guys, I'm sure, deal with a little bit is people will say, hey, I last saw them over here. The truth is my dog's going that way.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times myself, or really a lot of my friends who had even more experience than me, have gone through that scenario so many times where the information that's given to you is not accurate at all.
Trust your dog.
And you got to trust your dog 100%. So the more we expose ourselves to those things of solving that problem together, handler and dog, figuring it out, they get better.
There's that trust the dog, trust the training.
Yeah.
I guess I almost want to say trust your experience.
So that is a big one.
Yeah.
And that, which is why I was the bigger thing I'm trying to circle back to was, I'm actually a little surprised that you guys, I guess in your world, it is easier to obtain some type of item to.
If you don't have one, then you have an area dog.
Yes. Okay.
So
then that's how you guys get around it. You use an area dog who's just like, hey, there's somebody
Anybody out there. Yeah. And they learn through time too to
kind of to discriminate between the other rescue, the other search rescue people in the area through their kind of. Yeah. Nathan did a really good kind of example of that. How the dogs got good at. So they learned discrimination themselves.
Yes.
They realized the person wearing the radios and the whatever gear, the Carhartts, the things that we have, aren't ones we typically find. Right. Now, in the beginning, that was where he kind of showed where there's some confusion because in the beginning they get taught on those people, but then later on, that's not who they're looking for. They're looking for this one. Yep. So there's sometimes, depending on the dog and the training and the methodology and so forth, there's a learning curve that happens. In some dogs, it's a harder learning curve. Some dogs, it's a less of a learning curve.
Goes back to training.
Yeah.
Do you train with your other teammate out there that you now found? So, and it's the hard one I've seen for trailing and area is the walking subject because they're usually looking for somebody who's down. So if you have somebody who's walking or laying flat in a field, those seem to be super. That's something I think when you're training your dog, in area at least, you'll have handler position, right? You have positional awareness. Like, are you cueing your dog because you're facing them with your hands at your side?
Are you laying down?
And then
are you standing
there's also subject position. So are they in a tree? Are they standing? Are they crouching? Are they whatever it is? So you need to put those into your training regimen so that when you enter them into the field, you get to know them. So I have people hiding in trees and walking right to me and, crouching down and running away. Have all those in the training exercises, but you can never prepare for everything. So, and you don't want to. Like I had one person throwing rocks at my person. I'm not going to put that in a training. Maybe you guys do, but I wouldn't. So.
No, it's another thing I would say. So the type of victim, I don't know if the right word, subject, victim, whatever it's people are looking for. There are frequently those under some type of medical duress, maybe autism, maybe Alzheimer's. Do you guys in training get to use anybody in those? Okay.
So I wish. I mean, we sometimes will have somebody with an elderly parent that's got Alzheimer's that will be able to, and we've sometimes got the autistic kids, but it's really, really, really hard. Yeah. So, and there was a search recently where I did have 2 subjects, and my dog would only take article of one of them. She did not want to sniff the other article, was really, really odd to me. And I found out later that person was on medication for bipolar disorder. So I'm like, do they smell different to it? I mean, I'm sure she would still find her, I hope, but you can't.
It's an important assumption that we have to.
It's another question to have is like, I know they smell different when they're diabetic. I mean, I know I can smell different people. So I can only imagine for the dog. But training on, you're very right, accurate 100%, that we need to train on diverse subjects. That means ethnicity, and that means, also elderly people, just dementia, autism, suicidal, different races.
Under medication, like you said.
Under medication.
Which is a big one.
Chemo, I heard, is something too, but I haven't searched for somebody with chemo before, but I'm sure that might spell different as well.
I could imagine.
So that's where it goes when you go into your scientific mind. There's too many variables.
Yeah, there's
so
a
it's
lot.
like, how do you actually put that into training?
And the way I think of it is, again, taking lessons learned from my law enforcement careers, military careers, stuff like that, where we said, okay, we got to get better at using the dogs to identify what we are actually looking for. So I'll give the example in the bomb dog world. Is yes, we're given these nice little kits from the military or ATF or the companies we buy them from. But the reality is they never look like that when it's a real thing that we're looking for. And there has been a good shift. There needs to be more of this where you have the entire device, maybe minus one thing, in most cases is going to be the initiator, but you have all the components of a pipe bomb, all the components of a pressure cooker bomb, all the things that you're really going to have to find for real. And how does your dog do on that?
Right. The mix.
Yes, the entire odor picture of what it's supposed to do. And I think, to me, it would completely make sense that in the tracking, trailing, search and rescue world, if there was data, and I'm sure there probably is, maybe somewhere you'd have to aggregate it yourself, but most often, what kind of condition is the person in that we're looking for? Are they elderly, Alzheimer? How many are autism in comparison? How many are just somebody who's lost? And out of those, there's somebody just lost. Are they lost because they're going through some type of medical episode? Could it be an unknown thing, or could it be because they were on medication?
Yeah.
And I just, like, to your point, I think we can do better in training, and we probably need to be creative and discuss and have open conversations about how can we accomplish that. I think in some cases, like you said, there's family members that could be potentially used. There's pros and cons to that. I think there's more pros right now than cons. And then purposely reaching out and seeing how can we, like you said, maybe to universities, maybe as part of research, that maybe there's a university program already researching certain effects of people under these things. Could we also have an offshoot to use this with dogs and see how do dogs connect to laboratory research? And I just think if we're creative, we can do a lot of things.
If we could get some sort of agreement with some assisted living homes or something like that. But there's a liability issue.
Of course.
That's why it's a huge issue to do that. But a lot of and I can't say, this last week we've had a lot of searches, and it's been a variety of people. Just people going out and getting lost, people out getting hurt. But majority before that has been a lot of Alzheimer's. And it's people that walk the same route every day, and then one day they go a different direction. So that's like, okay, can your dogs actually figure that out? The freshest, we hope so, but it's a huge issue when you think about that. That's a whole different issue there. But getting different subjects and getting different scenarios is what you need to do in training.
The more pictures we get.
But you got to make sure your foundation is strong, because otherwise...
The right time to do this stuff.
And that's where it comes into learning how to read your dog. And I think one of the best ways to do that as a new handler is to walk with experienced handlers and ask them what they're seeing. Or you go pro yours and then ask someone to sit with you and ask them what they see. But it's hard on the videos because you can't get the environmental factors. Where's the wind coming? How hot is it? There's a lot of things that go into reading the dog that isn't just on a video. So
and I think you're right. But the way we get better at that is constantly going into those kinds of scenarios. You get better. I know, again, the parallels between what I would call the detection dog world and the search and rescue world. There's lots of really close parallels that happen. And the more that we expose ourselves to those kinds of conditions that we're required to operate in, the better we get at operating in those conditions. there's the right pace and time to put yourself into those to get ready for operational. I also think, and I'm learning myself, is it's foundation stuff is easier to construct and easier to conduct. Like I can do it in my backyard, I can do it in my garage, whatever it is. And we do lots and lots of that. And now with hindsight, after a number of years going from being an operational dog handler to then switching over to the more scientific foundational side of things, doing that for the past 3 or 4 years to now going back as a handler, I'm realizing, man, in some cases we spent too much time in those fundamental foundational areas and not enough time in comparison to being challenged and trying to figure out what's happening as I'm working.
It's kind of like playing a soccer game, right? Yeah. You have so many times practicing your dribble and your juggling, and then you have scrimmages, which would be training.
Yep.
So you have your drills, which are juggle the ball, do dribbling, and then go around the cones, and then you have your scrimmages, which is training.
Yep.
And then you have your searches is an actual game.
Yep.
So you need to kind of think of
scrimmages, keep some boundaries in place that aren't necessarily in the game. Yeah, it's a good analogy, and it's because I'm relearning in a sense how much I'm learning by constantly being in these uncomfortable searches. Like literally all I'm given is a scenario.
Yes.
That's going to match what I'm being called out for. So that way when I do get called out, I feel way better.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give an example. There was one, I haven't even shared this one. This will be called in a couple weeks. But we did one, there was a little public pool / park area. And Natalie went out the night before and placed some hides. I didn't know how many or where they were at. The plan was to come out there at 5 o'clock in the morning and go do the search. That way it was dark still. And we're doing this. Of course, the irony is, my joke with Natalie is, if you ever want to know where a place opens up or if you want to know the busiest area it's going to be, even though it's not at the time, have Natalie put hides out because that's the spot that'll be the busiest. So, of course, that morning I go out there, and again, I don't know the answer, but I just had a sneaking suspicion because the area she picked happened to be near where their pool was. In that morning, people were all lining up outside, and even this is early in the morning. And she didn't know that. She didn't knew she didn't know it was in the building. I happened to know that building was for the pool, but she didn't know that when she was setting up, apparently. And as I'm working this area, I'm doing this whole entire huge front of this complex. The only interest I was getting, very low levels of interest, was kind of near the building. I couldn't go to where in some of these areas because there's a whole group of people standing around, and they're all looking at me like, is there something going on that we need to know about? It's like no, we're just doing training. And I'm navigating this. I put dog number, after searching, I'm not getting anything. I put dog number 1 up. That was Gamble. We got nothing. Take out ammo, work the area. And by the time ammo was working the space, the people got let in to go to the pool. So after he had done part of the search, they were there initially, and then they left. I got to come in that area, but he picked up nothing. Now, as I was leaving the area, I had one more, like I call it boundary point, and I searched down that side, and ammo made a find that Gamble missed. But apparently what I didn't know, there was 2 other spots right near where everybody was sitting. But when watching the body camera footage, ammo was there, searched around it, but didn't pick it up. And that's reality. So I walked away and said, okay, with 1 dog, complete failure. We didn't find anything. Second dog found 1 of what turned out to be 3 items in the area. Now I have to dissect why that was occurring. Now, part of it could have been the fact that the people were around, and my dog, even though he didn't really care about the people, all of those smells and things there just distracted him, took him off the task. He didn't show me that, but I don't know what his nose is doing. All I could do was read him, and he wasn't showing me anything in that space. So the other part of the thing that we have to look at is what she used it's actually gun parts. And it hadn't been with a gun in probably a year or more. It's just been in a glass jar.
Metal.
So it was the metal, but it should still have GSR to some levels on it. To me, it'd still be noticed. But I also didn't see, because I didn't find it, how she hit it. And there was really thick vegetation around that area. So it might have been, since both dogs didn't get anything near the entry point, there's a couple of things I have to figure out. and I need to go back, and my corrective action is to test out a couple of things. Is it the items? Is it how it was hidden? Did it need more time?
I will say you're getting a big point for me where you need to be aware of the environment that you're searching in. If it's covered with people, I use the Where's Waldo example in some of my scent classes. Whereas, you have Waldo and a bunch of other people out there. And it's like, find Waldo, and you can't find Waldo, right? And then you just have the next screen, it's just him. So having all those people there is a huge factor that you need to rule out. And so that goes to the handler being accountable and responsible for their situation. And when you got there, I'm not saying judging you, but with me, if I get there and there's a bunch of people there, can I wait for them to clear out, or is this going to be constant, right? If they're just going in, then let's wait for them to clear out and then work it. If they're going to be there the whole time, then have I trained in that scenario before?
Yeah, and you're bringing up a good point, because what I actually went through was, when we first got there, there was nobody.
Yeah.
Like, we could see there was somebody like in the building, and he kind of walked out in and out the door a couple of times, but where my search started was away from that area. And by the time I got over there, then there was 2 people waiting outside. We're working the area. Then while I'm working it, a couple more people show up. And throughout the time, it went from basically nobody, let's just call it 1 person at best, but they weren't even outside, to 8-10 people by the time the end of gamble search, beginning of ammo search. There was 10 people there.
Yeah.
And then while ammo was searching, they all went inside. So then to your point, we have to figure out, are there limitations or things that we have to consider that could be limiting?
It's sort of like when you really have to look at what are you going to be deployed on, and are you training to that? So one of the bigger ones also, if you're like in Berkeley or Oakland or something, is stoplights. So if you're a trailing dog and you get to a stoplight and it's red, is your dog used to you stopping them in the middle of a trail and then starting on the other side of the street? And then on the other side of the street, is it going to be a clear picture, or is it going to be blown around by all the cars? So training in environments, like if you're looking for all those people, then you go train on a campus or in front of a pool or whatever you do, and you have to set up those trainings so that you have that knowledge. So that if you're on a search and you have that situation, you can report back, I have a lower confidence in this because of that, and I know from training that we haven't been successful in that, and that's because of this. So if we wait till this time frame, I can come back and be more confident in the outcome.
Yeah.
So it's really imperative, and that's where the experience comes in. Because I gotta say, maybe one search wasn't, but almost every single search I go on, never thought of that. We had a search, and it was, I'm not gonna say the county, but people who know the search will know the county.
Yeah.
And the person went and broke into a ranger's office, and they went into the lost and found, and they changed clothes. So they got new shoes, they got a flashlight, they got new jackets, they left their clothes there. So, when we're told that the person is missing and they're in sneakers and have a t-shirt and shorts on and no flashlight, we're thinking, they'll be pretty easy to find, right? They're not going to get very far. It's really cold out. It's raining. And then to find out that they changed clothes, and now they had a full Ranger's jacket on with boots and a flashlight. It's like, okay.
Welcome to the cop world.
How can you predict that one?
Yep.
So, there's all sorts of stuff that is really...
That's a great point.
Yeah, you don't know, and so you have to... I love the saying, trust your dog, but you got to trust your dog to the level you've trained them, and the training is kind of based on the experiences you've had. So if you don't go on any searches, then you're really good in the environment that you've set up in training, which is usually a lot narrower than you will be if you go on searches and bring back what you learn. The huge part is if you have everybody in the team searching and they bring back things so that they share it with the team and that whole team can grow together, that's huge.
Yeah.
That requires trust. And that's, I think, something that's lacking in
and
a lot of the
reducing of
communities.
egos.
Reduce your egos, share your failures, work as a team to success. The ideal team to me knows the strengths and weaknesses of every dog and team and is there to see all of them to the most success. So when I say, hey, I need a trail and I need to set it up this way, they know exactly what I mean, and they'll set it up for me to have, the outcome I want. It might not be successful, and that might be what I want. I want to see where my dog's going to fail point is. So it's all compounding, right?
Yeah. end the podcast with this question here. In your experience, this is definitely going to be relative to areas, but in your experience, because you have a diverse area, how many searches are in a rural area versus urban area?
You got to break that down by team.
Yeah, because I would imagine.
Yeah,
but you're a pretty diverse team. So in your experience, just for you, let's just take you. What would you say your percentage or like comparison ratio?
Question. It's a great question. I used to say a lot of urban, but I've got to say since 2020, people have been getting out in the woods more. So I got to say it's pretty equal right now.
Okay.
And almost leaning on more wilderness. And that brings up a great point because lately I've been training more urban because of the foxtails and the snakes and the heat.
Oh, yes.
So I might need to look at my training locations and put more wilderness in there because we are getting more wilderness. But the hard part also is they're in totally different locations. So they're up in the Sierras, they're up in Yosemite, and I don't always train there. So it's the diversity there. But I would say right now it's leaning more towards wilderness. And before last year, it'd probably be more urban.
Okay.
So it's
important to be skilled in both because you never know.
If you want to deploy, there's some handlers that are wilderness only because they live in the mountains and they don't ever expect to come down to San Francisco and search.
Yeah.
So they choose to do just wilderness only, and I think it's very different, wilderness and urban.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
that's a whole different topic.
I look at just the experience in law enforcement, and we go through the same things. Depends on where you're working.
Yep.
What your city is like or your county is like. Certain are going to be very rural. Some are going to be very urban.
Right.
You know, I hear people compare a lot of times what they see with, let's say, LAPD. That's a concrete jungle.
Yes.
You know, very rarely are they going to be in a rural environment. Their tactics and principles and things that they do are very different versus somebody who works in Montana.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the analogies I make a lot of times is you have a 5-year cop who's worked at LAPD or a 35-year cop that has worked in Montana. Let's just pick those locations. Which one has more experience?
How many call-outs do they have?
And when it comes down, it's a perspective.
You're bringing a great point up because it's also the training scenarios you set up. So in the wilderness, are you going cross-country all the time or are you staying on trail? And so I've seen dogs literally that have been trained on trails a lot, and then they do intersections and trails, and you go off trail, and the dog can't.
Yeah.
Contextually, they're not used to doing it, so that's out of bounds for them. And I've seen it also. We had trailing dogs go to Search Dog Foundation. We had them go up on the rubble pile and then hide in the rubble pile. The dogs saw the rubble pile as something that was off limit because they're used to going around those things. So put into training what you're going to have in the field and do the more difficult ones so that you can see where you need to get the dog's confidence and your confidence up in training.
Identify the gaps.
Identify the gaps and work on them.
I lied. The one thing I was asked or bring
Another
up,
one.
was when we were talking about handler education and investing in handler education. We had talked about the ability getting better at reading the dog, understanding the dogs, what they're telling you, and then of course, after we're kind of good at that, figuring out how to put the training information, like where do the methodologies fit into these things. But the other thing that I thought of as we were talking is really focusing on handlers being able to properly document their training and document real searches. And as we talked about before we even got on the recording of this, was one component that's very common in the law enforcement community or military community is lots of record keeping, whatever, right, wrong, or indifferent, how they do it. But there's record, they're ingrained with writing the stuff down. In the search and rescue community, I've seen the answers all over the place to we don't write anything. And when we had Tim Howling on here, he said the same thing, that there needs to be the switch. There needs to be their documentation of training, document what works, what doesn't work, what we've done to fix these problems if they exist. And then talking to Mike Kamisic, who tracks the legal side of things, has matched what we says what we're seeing now, which is you need to write stuff down. And the education that we need to kind of start focusing on is helping people on how to write stuff down and what's relevant to write and maybe what's relevant not to write, because there's going to be those on the one side of the argument that is like, don't write anything down, keep them in the dark, be as non-specific as possible, don't let them open you up for an attack. And then the other version of that has truth to it, which is be completely transparent, be honest, write down what happened, the good, the bad, the ugly, and what you did to address it. And from what the legal world is currently showing us is more transparency, the better. Search and rescue doesn't face this as much as law enforcement does, where law enforcement is kind of viewed these days as, well, they might be not telling you the full truth or they're withholding. Search and rescue isn't necessarily affected by that as dramatically, but in the cases where they've brought in a search and rescue to a law enforcement case, you guys are now facing the same scrutiny as the cop world did. So I think one of the things I would like to leave listeners and viewers with is reaching out or trying to find places where you can get good information on documentation and record keeping. What's your feel on that?
You need to cross-pollinate more.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are just sort of, they do what their group does, and that's what the policy says. And I think we need to revisit that. And I agree with Tim 100% that we need to change that somehow. I don't know what the answer is because I'm not in law and I'm not a cop. But, I come from research world where you document everything.
Yes.
If it's not documented, it's not done.
Yes.
So you have to, we don't know what I don't know what that answer is right now. But I think one of the things you hit on is we need to cross-pollinate more. So we need to work together more as a team. When we respond to a search, they don't see, it's Shay Cook from Carta or whatever. They see a dog handler. When you respond, it's not, well, sometimes they might go, that's Cameron Ford.
Yeah.
But we have a reputation as dog handlers, and we need to see that and work together as handlers because it impacts the whole community. But I think report writing is going to be very dependent on what you're doing.
Well, what you just said, regardless of what the uniform is.
Yeah, we're dog handlers.
We're seen as professional dog handlers.
Correct.
So to me, in order to be professional, it's how I conduct myself, carry myself, my being prepared for the job, either both physically or equipment related, knowledge, and then the ability to articulate
Document.
what happened.
Yep.
And when I'm missing some of these components, I'm, in my opinion, letting down the professionalism of our industry because it only takes one person that has a direct reflection on all of us.
Correct.
And in most cases, that happens through some type of legal action or a tragedy of some sort. So in frequently detection dogs, a little bit in the search and rescue world, is when there's a legal case that comes up that challenges the validity of the team. And if the team hasn't been, quote unquote, professional in their documentation or their educational level or their knowledge, they don't care. I think there was a Netflix show. I'm not sure. You might have seen it. But anyway, it was a case where they were studying how dogs, I think it was called Exhibit A, but they were looking at different technologies in the criminal evidence forensic side of things. And dog episode one of them. And they really quickly highlighted that they showed a search and rescue team from Texas, and the evaluator says, here's your area, do this, and it looked not good. It wasn't a good reflection. Then you had Martin from the UK come over who did his dogs, and then they showed his dogs doing a search in the garage for that missing girl that was in either Portugal or Spain or somewhere over there. And I think it was Madeline case. In any case, they highlighted some real weird discrepancies there, and then questioned like he says, hey, my dog in this other case that went on, this guy was accused of killing his daughter and running off, but they couldn't find the daughter anywhere. But his dog alerted to the car, to the chair of the car seat, the baby seat, as a cadaver alert. So then the law enforcement, along with other little pieces of evidence, kind of went with, oh, well, the dog confirmed that the child is dead based on the dog bark, as the victim or as the mother of the daughter says.
Trained final response.
Yes. My husband is in jail because of a dog bark is how she ends it. But So I would say Martin was more on the professional side, in the sense of he comes from the research side. He documented, and like he says on the case, hey, look, I'm not testifying to the guilt or innocence or anything like that. I'm just testifying to what my dog did.
Yeah.
This is what my dog did.
When I was in court, they called it a dogologist.
Yeah, right. There you go. So, but to our point and how we'll end it is, I think it's important, regardless of whatever our organization is, what our group is, what our area is, if we are doing this in some form of professional, whether it be volunteer or paid, we probably need to look inwardly and say, are we doing the profession its justice by being professional? Am I getting myself educated properly? Am I physically fit to do the job? Am I mentally fit to do the job? Am I educated properly? Or am I just doing it to feel good about myself or my own ego because I'm out there doing this? And collectively, as an industry, we should try to focus on how can we make things better and lift all of us. And with some of this, that means change.
Yes.
And it means that we might need to revisit
change.
Yes. It might need we need to revisit the way we have always done it.
Yep.
And look at it and say, where can we make or affect some changes that might be small changes, but have a good outcome or a stronger outcome? And if we can do that, then we're moving the needle forward. And if we can't do that, why? And are we at risk of not progressing the way we should or the way that society needs us to be reliable?
Yeah.
And that's internal conversations. That's conversations within organizations or people themselves. But I think we can all agree that if we are doing this in some professional aspect, we should be professional. And we should have.
And then you have to define professional.
I say then you have to figure out what that is. But I would say at a minimum, it's being able to do the job competently, having the knowledge to do so, whatever you're doing, that you're knowledgeable about doing it, and that way, and then being tested that you're reliable to do it. And testing happens in different ways and at different times.
Yeah.
And then the last part to me would be the documentation.
So what do you think, I'm going to throw a question at you. What do you think should be included in the documentation, in a logbook?
Yep. So what I feel that is important is, first thing is, where are we? Mm-hmm. What's the location I'm doing this in? The construct of the scenario. Like, so basically, so if I'm in an open area, so I'm going to use your word a little bit. We're in an open area and I'm in my world looking for a firearm versus looking for a firearm in a school or looking at it in a potentially, very rarely a vehicle, but it's either an open area or some type of internal building. And then am I looking for a firearm or am I looking for shell casings? So in my training construct is, where am I at, the date and the time, because then maybe a weather aspect needs to be considered.
Do you have temperature, humidity?
I don't go too crazy with temperature, humidity for what I do.
Okay.
I do feel there could be relative importance to other disciplines. Wind is always documented. That's pretty relevant to most teams if you're doing any type of outdoor searching. If I'm indoors, it just says indoors HVAC. And then if what time of year, obviously if I'm in the wintertime, I'm going to have some heat. And if I'm in the summertime, I'm going to probably have AC to deal with. I might annotate in my narrative there was fans on or windows open or things like that. What I can really say big picture wise is I'm going away from lots of checkbox style documentation to more of, I even have my phone on me. I was going to pull my phone up. I do most of my stuff now in Apple Notes. It's the location, the time, wind direction, and then I describe the search area, whatever it is. I give a good description of it. We were at doing a 4-way intersection, 200 yards each direction, or I was doing the side of a roadway only, or I was inside a school, or I was inside potentially a business of some type. And I describe what that looks like and how many rooms or the square footage in a sense, or distance if I'm outside. I give a good description of what that looks like. Mm-hmm. Then I describe what we did. I deployed from this angle, whatever it is, that point, northwest side, east, whatever, and I worked in this direction. And while observing my dog work, I either saw my dog do X, Y, or Z, or due to seeing my dog do something, I also then had my dog conduct a further sniff investigation of this area, or I assisted by lifting my dog up and placing him on something, or so I
You have a small dog.
Yes, but my bigger dog, I pick him up occasionally, but I do what I can. I paint the picture of what happened. Now, what I have, and I'm curious as to what search and rescue may have, but in the law enforcement sector, even to include security now, more and more and more, if not all, are they have body camera footage of some type.
Yep.
So what's really kind of nice is, and I teach this now as part of my classes for the professionals, is they will do a search. I tell them to write down immediately when they're done what happened. Just write a note, what happened, and what you saw happen. And then at the end of the day, though, we review the body camera footage, and we see how much matches up to what you wrote down to what we see in the video. Because video is good, but it also has risks because it gives you only a perspective from that lens.
Correct.
So that has to be considered. But in today's day and age, video is extremely important to help authenticate what we described in writing. So my records are much more about what we did, what we located, if we didn't locate, and was that the correct outcome. And if I did have a problem, the other thing that's added to it, if like for that search we didn't find anything, outcome was negative find, and I missed with one dog, 3 objects that were in the search space were missed by the dog. Yep. Corrective action would be as follows, and then that's where I decide what happened. Was it the people? I have to look at, was it potentially the material that we used that was either aged out? My dog wasn't good at that. So there's something I'm gonna have to go through on my corrective action that I'll apply in future training lessons to address what I see there. So that's what my records look like. It's just pretty much location, date, time, some weather conditions of some type, and then a narrative. Like if there was a trainer or somebody who set it up for me, I put them, and then potentially the set time. So for my world, where they put something out, how long, and your guys would be tracked like when they went out and left and come back. So we track some time component of when the item was out to when we deployed. And if I do find, I'm 50-50. Sometimes it is relative, depending on the discipline, to write when the item was located by time, because then that kind of completes the whole time schedule. Okay. So to me, that would be dependent on your discipline. But so you have a time component, you have your weather component or conditions component, and then the narrative of what happened. How did you work your dog, and what did you see?
And I can only speak from what I have. So and it's so diverse. I mean, I can't say everybody's the same. So I'm going to use a name because she created the spreadsheet, Kat McBride.
Okay.
She's the one that has SearchGram, TikTok stuff. Okay. But she created a spreadsheet, and I've added to it because she does just trailing.
Sure.
So I have one dog, Zinka, who's trailing in cadaver.
Yep.
And then I have Ren, who's trailing in disaster. Mm-hmm. So I have all of that you have, but then for the cadaver, I also have what size of source is it?
Perfect, yep.
Hanging, surface, or buried.
Yep.
And then I also have an obedience element to it, because for FEMA, you have to constantly do your obedience. Mm-hmm. And then I have rubble, open space, barrel. So I have different things there. And then at the end, I do have a free form for description, but I have objective of the training, because I always try to go out with a plan.
Yep. I could not agree more
I
to that.
rarely go out and go, okay, give me whatever you have.
Yeah, I don't recommend winging it.
So
you have
I
to
always
go
go out with a plan. So I go out, I have a slot that says, what is my plan for the day? So what's the objective of that training for that dog?
So as we get into this a little bit, this is where we have to say there's a trainer's sheet that has what I call the P's of training. What's the plan? What do I need to prepare?
Yep.
What's the procedure and what's the protocols? And then what proofing? I add that one more P for proofing. That to me, that to me is, I look at that a little bit.
Proficiency.
Yes, is the trainer's job. If the trainer is you, then of course you have that. Then the handler documentation sheet is kind of what we're describing. And you brought up another point that is really important and then specific to detection disciplines. But like you said, what is the substance and how was it? How was it placed out? What was it? In some
how
cases,
long has it been placed?
Yeah, in some cases it's the weight of the subject, like how much surface area, how large it was.
Because mine could be
those
bones, mine could be a hand, right?
Yep.
I mean,
and mine could be shell casings, could be a gun part, could be the whole gun. And I do document in my firearm stuff potentially how freshly fired was the gun or the shell casings. Was it done was it right away?
Hot or not?
In the drug dog world, it's usually they go by weights. Bomb dog world, it's typically weights and substance. And what I think both drug and bomb dog worlds should start looking at is how the item was concealed, documentation of concealment in the sense of how was it a pipe bomb? Was it just the chemicals or the drug world? Was it packed in dryer sheets and in a box, and did your dog, so there's certain things, but you can describe that in the narrative a little bit at the end, whether your outcome, whether you found it or not. If you didn't find it, you can say, well, this is how it was packaged, this is what was put out. And again, that could be its own little box where you're writing what the training aid is. I have both versions of doing it. Again, I kind of describe that more or less now in the notes.
Yeah.
But I've got lots of years of having it separated out.
So, I have that in this section because sometimes I'll use different people's sources.
Yep.
So I'll say different people's sources. Yep. And then, so I do have the plan, and then I have the performance. So then that kind of describes, I don't describe the area that well because it's either wilderness or urban.
Yeah,
yours
would be.
Yeah. So then I have the description of how they performed, and then I have a checkbox on the end of needs follow-up or not. And so if I check the box, then I know when I'm going through my training log, where did I have my issues? And then I read back and what it was. I love the drop-down menus and the checkboxes because Kat showed me this, that at the end of the day, at the end of the year, you can do a spreadsheet and it will show you, you've trained on 90% females, so you need to get some males in there.
It's extreme. I totally agree. There is a data collection component.
It's really important,
which is really helpful for a lot of things. And I think, as we talk out loud, there's an easy way to customize this to each detection discipline.
Yes.
Certain things should be a drop-down menu that collects data. And then another section is a well-written narrative of a description from the handler that tells what they saw.
That's what I have.
And what occurred based on their point of view. But you're absolutely, now, again, the professional world, a lot of these handlers have programs they're using, whether it be CATS or PackTrack or Blue something or other. And a lot of those things are naturally natively built in, and those information data sources are aggregated. And like you said, you can get spreadsheets really fast. I know another easy one that people are using is Google Forms.
That's what we use.
Yeah, you can literally just hop on Google Forms, create when you want. But I think at the whole end of the day is we should be documenting something.
Yeah, and I do hours and miles too.
Yep.
But then this comes to the question of everybody says you should have 16 hours of training.
It's the recommended. The legal
so
side has given some recommendations
to you. Then the scientific mind comes out in me. What is the definition of time? Is it dog nose time?
Yep.
Or is it time at training?
Yeah.
So do you count the time that they're doing obedience? Do you count the time they're working only?
And there's been no legal...
What is training time?
Yep, so there's been no legal specific criteria to that. There has been called into question what you just said.
Is it training?
Is it sniff time? Did the dog sniff for this long, or was it this? So what everybody has kind of agreed upon, training time is a all-encompassing thing because training includes handler education, so while you're sitting there talking and doing stuff, nose time, dog doing the job, and then the last part is the documentation aspect counts as training time. So in almost all aspects in the 16 hours is an inclusive component of all those things. It's not saying it's specifically the dog doing this task for this many hours. So to kind of clarify that for those that were always wondering, like you brought up, there is no legal requirement that says it must be this. There's not even a legal requirement that says 16 hours.
No.
16 hours is just became an industry recommended aspect because what's starting to come out through the OSAC and NIST is a more of a construct of into the discipline. Like this discipline should, best practices would be this many hours. So if you have a multi-purpose type of dog or a dual-purpose type of dog, it should be this many hours towards this skill and this many hours towards this skill. And I know one of the things that's coming up for the dual purpose world is, let's say you say 16 hours. Well, it's 16 hours towards the, as they call it, the patrol function or general purpose function. And then 16 hours dedicated towards the detection function, which now tells certain agencies that's 32 hours of training time.
Right.
So that changes the game a little bit based on a recommendation. And what's going to happen is some won't follow it. No problem. That's their choice. But if the legal world goes to the book and the book says this is what a best practice is, they're just going to ask that team, why aren't you following the best practices? And if they can answer it in a very reasonable way, they can dispel that. If they don't answer it in a reasonable way, it's going to turn into potentially an issue that has to be worked out. And then the legal system, the legal world will then give a judge will say, I think the team was deficient because they didn't do 32 hours. And then you're going to see the pendulum shift to, ooh, I don't want to be the team that doesn't have 32 hours. And you'll see the reaction. Yep. And then you'll have the group, if the judge says, hey, 32 hours is a nicety, but this is a 10-person department. There's no way they're going to get 32 hours. Doesn't mean they're not reliable. I'm fine with their 16 hours. Then they don't worry about it that way. So I think at the end of the day, all in all, as long as we're being professional, documentation, proper training, making sure that we are able to do the job, and we're meeting, and we understand our limitations and our capabilities, we're doing a lot of things. We're doing a lot of things the right way if we can follow those rules.
Admit your inabilities.
Yes.
Admit your weaknesses.
To say this is not a search for us.
Yep.
And I think it's a hard thing to do.
I respect a handler that does that.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Same here. I've had to be there before. I've walked up and went. Actually, there was one a few weeks ago. Ammo has not been exposed to working around when there was a female in heat, and we started the search. He made a find. I was like, he hit it. It was nice. And then abnormally, he went off the odor right down to the ground, right when I was about ready to mark him. And I was like, what is he doing? And I hear from the background, oh, I ran my dog. She's in heat. And I could see him doing the things that he would do related to heat, like chattering and things like that. Yeah. So I was like, I'm done.
Yep.
I want to train through that, but I need to have my plan.
Training.
I need to redo things right now to address that, and right now is not the search to do it in.
That goes back to you got the experience, you put it in the training, and now when you're out there, you know.
And then I will set up training purposely to teach him how to work through that.
Yep.
But that situation was not one I could do it in, and I had to say, nope, we're not doing it.
Yep.
And like you said, it's not. Believe me, I wanted to do it, and but this was again, experience has taught me that wasn't the time to do it. So, well, thank you again for your time and coming on here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And those that want to find, you can go to Mark Rober's YouTube channel. I forget what he titled it, but he was trying to...
He keeps changing it.
Yeah, he wanted to basically fool the dog. Could he fool a tracking dog and get your dog not to follow him? And I kind of laughed. Almost all the tools that he employed made it easier for your dog to find him than it did to not find him. But it's a really cool thing to watch. How do people find you? Is it social media?
So from that Mark Rober one, his producer, sweet guy named Luke, created a website for me.
Oh.
It's K9shay.com.
Okay, so SCHAY. Sorry, SHAY, right?
K9, number 9.
Yep.
SHAY.com.
Yep.
And it has all my stuff on there.
Perfect.
So, and I'm always wanting to learn more. So I'm hoping to work with universities again to get more research out there doing trailing specific.
Well, as we talked about it, there's definitely a need for...
There's a huge need for it.
It's kind of an area that's been overlooked now that detection got a lot of focus on science. So now hopefully some of that focus can shift over towards you guys
that would
too.
Be fantastic.
So
thank you again.
No, thank you very much for being on here. Thank you guys for watching and listening to K9s Talking Sense, where it's okay to be nosy.